these all follow on or lead up to my presentation really well, and I'm looking at older people, the infirmities that they have and what happens with dementia, and how design can really help them get outside and use open spaces. So there's a few facts to start with. An awful lot of us are 65 plus, and that was 2017, and I'm one of the baby boomers, one of the early baby boomers, so I've got there a bit quicker than some. But younger people too, if they are unfortunate enough to have dementia, have very much the same symptoms as older people. Dementia design works for us all, but it does also work for delirium, learning disabilities, and other conditions such as Parkinson's and MS, people with poor sight and so on. And just to give you a range, 60 to 64.6% may have dementia, but by the time you get to 95 plus, and we're talking about people hopefully living longer and hopefully over more areas than the last speaker was telling us about, it's approaching 1 in 2 that will have some form of dementia. So we really need to look at how to keep people fit and healthy. The key word in designing for this really is complexity, because not only will older people with dementia be old and therefore they will have the impairments that are common in later life, but they will also have other conditions too. And if you have dementia, you may not understand that you've got some of these conditions, and it's really important to keep people as healthy as possible. So 61% of people with dementia will have 3 or more comorbid conditions, many of which are treatable. So I'm going to look very briefly at those. Muscles and bones. It's normal as you get older to have weaker muscles and less good balance. You may also, as I do, have osteoarthritis, or as friends of mine have, Parkinson's. This can mean that you droop a little bit more, your back bends a bit more, you can't find it harder to look up. You don't walk quite as fast, you have a poorer reach. I notice I've shrunk a bit, so I can't reach the shelves I used to in the kitchen, which is really annoying. Reduced mobility and a higher risk of falls. And the issue about falls is that if you have a fall, a bad fall, end up in hospital, you're 3 times more likely or so to end up in care afterwards, and within 3 months to be dead as an older person. So the implications are the cone of vision, which means that because you've got diminished neck muscles, it's important that notices and signs are put lower down. And that example at the top, with a very poor toilet sign, which I'll come on to later, is too high. Most people won't look up that high, and indeed if you've got poor sight you probably won't see it. Signs are so important and should be probably for older people the bottom of the sign about 1.2 metres from floor or ground level. So your lungs aren't quite as good as you get older. I'm sorry folks, all those who are over 40, it starts to decrease. And we all need oxygen to get our brains working, which is why exercise is so good, because it's pumping the blood around your body. Many environments have poor air quality, particularly internal environments, not only short of oxygen, but often with pollutants. The implications are that we need to make sure that buildings have really good ventilation. Air fresheners, such as those two, say only use in a well-ventilated space, which is exactly where you wouldn't use them, because if it's well ventilated, you don't need to. So they need to be taken with a pinch of salt. And outside, hedges and trees can vastly reduce pollution. Hedges get the low-level pollution from cars, trees get the higher-level pollution, but you have to get the species right. And those are the 2 research references which bear this out. Then your ears. Sound becomes increasingly irritating as you get older. You can't hear the high frequencies. When we have a sound machine, which we do sometimes when we lecture, which goes up the frequency level, you can pick out those under 30 because they can hear things that the older ones can't. Even almost the dog whistle sounds. So, you know, it's very difficult as you get older. And older people can become very overwhelmed by noise, getting angry or withdrawing. And indeed, a friend of mine who has Parkinson's, we went to a very busy restaurant one night in Edinburgh where the acoustics were dreadful, and her disintegration within about 20 minutes was visible. So we need quieter spaces. We need soft surfaces to absorb sound. Externally, you really need to look at what's around if you've got a nice open space. Avoid busy roads or under flight paths. Then our ears and our eyes together. We rely on good visual clues, often to be able to understand what we see. And indeed, if we all lip read to some degree, so if your hearing isn't very good, but you can see somebody's face, you get a better chance of understanding what they're talking about. You know, so we look at small tables in care homes, places where people can sit and face each other, not benches all in a line. So very important to think about these things when designing. Your lens becomes thicker in an older eye, so you see things with a slightly yellow tinge. Colour is far less useful than people think it is. The colours you can pick out are the reds, oranges and yellows. When I go to my oil painting classes, I find it very hard to see the difference between the greens, the browns and the purples, often to the annoyance of myself and others. So there's a decrease in sensitivity to contrast as well, and that's really a key issue. Glare is very hard to tolerate, and think of Prince Philip and his car accident. Glare meant he couldn't see, and it's a particular problem. So this is just a little demonstration of the sorts of other impairments that you can get in your eyes. So the big one is normal vision, taken from my home window. You can have glaucoma, which means that you can see the centre, but the edges start becoming invisible. Macular degeneration, which means that you lose the vision in the centre of your eye, so you often see people with macular degeneration sort of moving sideways to try and see something. Cataracts, which obviously are very curable, but somebody with dementia may not be able to explain that they've got a problem. Or if you've had a stroke, some people with a stroke will lose half of their vision. So it's important to understand these sorts of things too. Age-relating impairments, this is one dear to me because I've always had this problem, needing the loo. And 90% of men over 80 have got an enlarged prostate. With women, the pelvic floor is usually weak from quite young ages. And older people get very anxious if they can't find a toilet, which means that if they want to go out somewhere and they don't know where there's a toilet in the locality, it may dissuade them from ever going out. So we actually need more outside toilets, clearly labelled. They need to be nearby where you're living, clearly visible, clearly signed. Symbols are helpful, but bear in mind that the standard ladies' gents symbols can cause problems for people with dementia, because as one lady put it, well, I went into that one because I wear trousers and the little man's got trousers on. So that's a problem. And also they're often too high. And then the wheelchair symbol for a disabled toilet, well, really, what does that mean? Does it mean a toilet? Why would you know? Anyway, the types of dementia, there are many, and I'm not going to go into it in great detail, but it means all of these things, they all have the same similar impairments: memory, learning, reasoning, high levels of stress, challenges with the senses, which in some people is perceptual, and difficulties in adjusting to the impairments of older age. And the good design helps us all. And people often think design for dementia is going to be ugly, but it isn't. It's really helpful because it's common sense. If you get it wrong, people with dementia, and indeed many older people, and some younger people with taps and shower units in hotels and public buildings, they become unnecessarily disabled. Slip, trip, fall. And of course, I've said what happens with falls. It's very dangerous for older people. They may become very distressed, or they may simply suffer death by boredom. And all of these things affect your health, your cognition, and your behaviour. So we need to be very careful to try and make people as independent as possible. Everything has to be easy to see, easy to understand, and being familiar too. If it's something that you see that you think, oh, I know what that is. Yes, I understand how that works. That helps. Clear signage is important, absolutely really important, but it often needs a symbol too, and upper and lower case letters, because that's easier to read. Steps and changes in level are a big issue. They need to be really clear to see. For clear vision, to see things that you really need to, like handrails, door handles, grab rails in the loo, the toilet paper, the seat, you need a good 30 light reflectance values difference. And if you wonder what those are, it's that light reflectance value 100 is white, 0 is black. You never get those extremes. But you need a good 30 degrees difference, and in fact paint charts usually have these on. And understand too that some materials and finishes can cause perceptual problems. Now I'm coming on to some of the perceptual problems that can happen. This is a well-known building at Edinburgh Royal Infirmary. And the way in, there is little signage. I have to say the university does signage very badly because it's very small and quite often quite hard to see. This particular door is highly reflective, so you're seeing patterns which can confuse people with dementia or with poor eyesight. The paving, this is my particular bugbear, multicoloured granite paving. And I do apologise if there's anyone here that's either designed this or designs with that sort of paving. But for somebody with poor eyesight or somebody with dementia or cognitive impairment, it's meaningless because you do not know what it is. Is it a hole? Is it repairs? Am I going to fall over? Is it rough? Is it smooth? And then, of course, if you have a silver chair on it, you might not see the chair if your eyesight's poor. So for people who are short-sighted, like I am, if you take your specs off and then half shut your eyes, you begin to understand how colour vanishes, contrast vanishes, and you can't always see what things are. Now, a friend of mine who's got MS, his problem is he's lost the sense of feeling in his feet. So because he can't feel with his feet, he doesn't know what surfaces are, so they become all the more difficult. And of course, people with Parkinson's, they shuffle, that very often. People with dementia shuffle. And so it's easy to trip, and if you're frightened of tripping and you don't know what a surface is, there's a problem. So that's one. Some design issues. Unexpected shapes in paving can be very confusing. White shapes in black paving or black services covers in light paving. And people will think they're a hole, or maybe it's a piece of earth, or what is it, but I don't want to walk over it. Unfamiliar landscapes can be distressing. Now this is a Maggie Centre. Some people may love it. My view is if you were an older person with a degree of cognitive impairment but also wanting to use a Maggie Centre, you wouldn't understand what this was. Is it therapeutic? I don't know. Then, of course, if you've got a door and you want to go into it, it's great if you can highlight the door, but you've got to be able to see the door handle as well. And sometimes if they're too close in tone rather than colour, you can't find it. And then on the bottom one, changes in ground level. Now this is where the 30-degree light value is not, light reflectance value is not useful. When you've got sharp differences in tone between materials, people will tend to walk along, stop, wobble. Is that a change in level? Lift a foot and then maybe fall over because they can't perceive what it is. So there are ways of changing it. There's a few solutions. You use paving that isn't strongly patterned, recessed service covers in pavements where you think people are going to have an issue. Try and keep them off pavements anyway, service covers if you can. Slot drains which don't present a visual barrier. Doors that are easy to see and handles that contrast. And the other thing too, if you're thinking about door handles, round knobs as you've got arthritic hands are very hard to turn. So a lever handle is therefore much easier. And a lot of this applies to what you find inside buildings too, taps that are easy. I went into the ladies here and I looked at the tap like that, to spout. Now do you push the top or do you turn it? And I thought, no, it's not working. Put my hand underneath, nothing happened. And eventually some kind person pointed out there was a little black dot at the back that you put your hand in front and then the water came out. But you see, that's really difficult. That's the sort of things that older people, like me, and I haven't got dementia yet, but people with cognitive impairment will find they can't use, and to go to, for example, to a public toilet, not be able to wash your hands, it's distressing because you can't understand how it works. And there's a few in Edinburgh Airport too like that. This is to show the kinds of publications that we do at Handcare, which is designing for the future. And on the dementia working group is this amazing lady called Agnes Houston, who has had dementia for a long time, but she puts her dementia to good use by helping people and explaining to people what it means. I went out with her a walk along the high street once, and she was very disconcerted by the very large paving slabs that had very obvious joints between them. She found that very problematic. She finds going into a lift with a black floor almost impossible because the black floor looks like a hole and she's frightened she'll fall into it. And she provides a lot of advice, and she's written this book called Talking Sense, which is in publication at the moment, so I haven't seen it, but I've seen a rough draft of it, and it's really trying to make sure that people understand what it's like to have cognitive impairment. Toilet Talk was a short booklet that you can download actually online from Hammond Care's website, free, or buy it for a tenner. And it's really talking about the problems that toilets present for people, both outside and inside, wherever you might be. In the room outside was the Hammond Care garden book that I did with Cole Cunningham. We're also doing publications on air quality and acoustics. But as I've got older and I've begun to experience some of the issues that hit older people, I have such a much better understanding. And I was actually in a wheelchair in December because I had an operation on my ankle, and being wheeled along the pavement in a wheelchair was utterly terrifying. And then you find all the curbs that don't work, and all the curbs where maybe there's a very steep ramp down which actually doesn't work because the ribs go the wrong way. And my husband didn't know to go down backwards off a curb to start with, so I very nearly fell out. So you begin to realise all the things that can hit you, but understanding the problems that older people have is absolutely key to getting good design. I could go on forever, but I better stop. Thank you.